Dear alumni, parents, friends, welcome to join us to join the gathering for Dean Doug Guthrie. Based on my knowledge, this is the first time of the Dean of the George Washington University School of Business come to Beijing. Thank you all very much to take your time to come here, and Dean Doug Guthrie will share his viewpoint with us with regard to his plan of school business development and also his U.S.-China relations, the view from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much. And at the very young age, Dean Doug Guthrie has achieved a lot of great achievements. He has, so long biography, so I cannot afford to miss any information about him. So I have to read his biography. Dean Doug Guthrie, Professor of International Business and Professor of Management at the George Washington University School of Business. He's an expert in the fields of economic reform in China, leadership and corporate governance, and corporate social responsibility. Previously, Dr. Guthrie served as Professor of Management at New York University's Stern School of Business. He also held a joint appointment as a Professor of Sociology at NYU's Faculty of Arts and Sciences and was the Director of Executive Education at Stern School of Business from 2007 to 2009. In addition, he holds positions. Dr. Guthrie has held visiting professors at Harvard Business School, INSEAD, and graduate schools of business at Stanford University, Columbia University, and Emory University. He also served as Director of Business Institutions Initiatives at the Social Science Research Council and has been academic leader of the Berlin School of Creative Leadership since 2008. Dr. Guthrie holds an Art Bachelor in Eastern Asian Languages and Civilizations with a concentration in Chinese literature from the University of Chicago. He earned his master's and PhD degrees in organizational sociology from the UC Berkeley. Fluent in Mandarin Chinese, Dr. Guthrie studied in Taipei, Taiwan Island during his undergraduate studies and conducted his doctoral research in Shanghai, China. His dissertation research was recognized with the American Sociology Association's National Award for the top dissertation in the field in 1997. Dr. Guthrie has authored 3 books, co-edited 2 more, and authored or co-authored more than 40 academic articles on Chinese economic reform, leadership, corporate social responsibility, and more than 60 short articles and reports on the same topics. Now please join me to warmly welcome our Dean of the School of Business to give a presentation, Dr. Doug Guthrie.
各位客人，大家好。我今天要抱歉你，因为我希望我可以给你们这个演讲完全是用中文，但是这几年因为我刚当了这个很辛苦的一个工作，我的中文退步了，所以我没办法，我无奈。所以我要用英文讲，好不好？Okay, so what I'd like to do today is I'd like to take a little time and talk to you about the substantive topic that we promised you, which is the topic about the ways in which China and U.S. relations are developing, and my own opinion about what that economic development means for our understanding of China's economic reforms. We have marketed this discussion as the view from Washington, although I have to admit that this is actually just my view. I can't make the case that this is actually Washington's view in general, and so I just want to give that caveat out there to start from. I'm going to race through some topics and give you some things to think about. I'll try to talk slowly, but I wanted to make it quick enough so that I can actually spend a little time towards the end talking about what our plans at GW are for taking the school to being a top business school in the country and in the world, and also for thinking specifically about our economic reform, our economic development and our engagement with China. Okay, so I want to just kind of move through that discussion. So where do we begin on this conversation? It's a very interesting moment to start to think about issues of the relationship between China and the U.S. because we are actually in a state of economic crisis in the United States today. The United States is in a very, very bad situation economically, and there are many reasons for this. Now, some would argue that we were in a bad situation in the 1970s and 1980s, and we worked our way out of it. We saw a new wave of innovation. We saw the rise of the internet bubble that emerged in the 1990s. And we saw a new financial innovation and set of innovations that emerged in the 2000s. And that's all fine and good. But I actually think we're in a situation today in which the world is more interconnected and more globally dynamic than it's ever been. And it is absolutely crucial that we figure out a way to think about who our partners around the world are, and to think about how we actually engage with China specifically on a path towards mutual economic development and growth. Now, right now in the United States, we spend a lot of time blaming China for our economic woes. I get asked about this in interviews all the time. People will say, so you're a China expert. Don't you think that China is to blame for the failure of the U.S. economy right now because all of our jobs are moving offshore? They're all moving to China. And look at that trade imbalance. It's terrible. And look at the fact that China hasn't allowed its yuan to appreciate as much as it should have. Right? We hear this over and over and over again. In my opinion, this is simply laziness on the point in the position of the U.S. economy. We are simply not, first of all, understanding what our economic responsibilities are in terms of building an industrial economy. And second, we are not understanding what we can actually learn from China. We take solace in the fact that we think of ourselves as the greatest capitalist economy in the world. We're certainly the largest economy in the world. But what I always say to crowds in the United States, and this is the thing that makes people somehow the most upset, is I say, what does it mean that the largest communist society in the world is the most dynamic capitalist economy in the world? What does that tell us about how complex the global economy is today? So what I want to talk about specifically, I'm going to talk a little bit about renewable energy and make a case for why we're falling behind in the area of renewable energy, and also make a case about why China is surging so far ahead in the area of renewable energy. And then we'll actually, I think, talk a little bit, try to put that in perspective about U.S.-China relations. Recently, in the New York Times and a number of other newspapers, it was reported that China stole yet another company from us. Evergreen Technologies, a Massachusetts-based company, shut its doors and moved over to China because it could not survive economically in the United States. Now, this is a company that many people had lauded as being a part of our resurgence in renewable energy and renewable technology. Yet many venture capitalists today will make the case that the United States is simply not measuring up in building this crucial new energy. They will often ask the question, why is it that China is surging so far ahead of the rest of the world in building the industry of renewable energy, while Europe is doing okay but lagging a little bit behind China, and the United States is completely off the grid? Why is that? Now I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is, because I'm going to talk about what drives sustainability initiatives and what drives investment in new industries. So in the United States, when we want a new industry to emerge, we often do symbolic things. 1977 or 78, actually I guess it's 1979, Jimmy Carter announced with a great deal of fanfare that he put new solar panels on the top of the White House. Right? A symbolic act to say how important sustainability was for what he wanted to do. Actually, George Bush took those same solar panels off in the 2000s, and Barack Obama put them back on. Right? So we have this constant debate about, well, if the president is putting solar panels on top of the White House, renewable energy must be important. Then Barack Obama stands up at the State of the Union address and very laudably, in my opinion, says, we do big things. We need to be doing these big things. But I always ask leaders, when I'm talking about jobs in America, and I'm talking about jobs with many different people in the United States system, and I always ask them, do we really do big things? Are we doing big things in the United States? They talk about this as our Sputnik moment. Sputnik moment, that's interesting. That's very much of a Cold War mindset about competition with Russia. But what does it mean to think about this as our Sputnik moment in 2011, a time in which we need to have a partner in the forest. We need to have a partner in China. Right? And it's a very different kind of moment. Now, I would argue what we do in the US is we complain about these things. In September of 2010, one of the major US unions filed a dispute claim with the U.S. Department of Commerce, hoping that that dispute claim would be elevated to the WTO to complain that China was engaging in unfair practices. They were stealing our technology and stealing our jobs to build their renewable energy industry. Now, I think this is just laziness. This is just completely ineptitude on the part of U.S. industrial policy. Because the truth of the matter is, China is just being smart capitalists. They are understanding what it takes to build an industry in a way that the United States does not. So what does that mean? Think about English Solar. Last year alone, the Chinese government invested $34.6 billion in the development of the solar photovoltaic industry. Right? Now, $34.6 billion maybe in terms of GDP doesn't sound like a lot of money, but if you compare it to what's being invested on the US side in the development of renewable energy, it is light years ahead. Right? And as a result, you get a powerful brand. Now, it was particularly depressing to me when I was watching the World Cup this past summer. And you'll notice what we have to offer here as what we're marketing to the world is McDonald's, and what you guys are marketing to the world is English Solar. What does that say? Right? We're marketing hamburgers, you guys are marketing photovoltaic panels. Right? Not good for us. So, how do we think about this? Well, let me tell you a couple of quick stories that really put this discussion into context. So not long ago, I was having lunch with the chairman and CEO of DuPont. And I was talking to him about this question of what it means to develop an industry. In the United States, it's not only the problem that we don't have enough subsidies for the development of renewable energy, but we believe that venture capital is going to bail us out. All we have to do is sit on the sidelines, let venture capital come in, they will fund the industry. Here's the problem. Venture capital typically wants to find exit strategies of about 7 to 8 years. This industry is going to take 15 years to build. So venture capital is sitting on the sidelines. They're saying, we're not investing. We don't know what the price points are. We don't know what the procurement patterns are. We don't know whether or not this is going to be a leverageable industry, right? And they're sitting on the sidelines. Federal government's sitting on the sidelines because they can't decide what to do. State governments are sitting on the sidelines because the federal government hasn't given them the signal of what they should do. Right? So everybody's waiting. And of course, then there's the banks who got TARP funding, but they think this is all risky because they don't want to guarantee federal loans for any type of industry that they can't really understand what the federal government and the state government doesn't understand what should be happening. Right? So we're sitting there. Right? So, back to our story about DuPont. Here's an organization that has major technology and is developing factories in photovoltaic arrays. I talked to the chairman and CEO over lunch, and he said, you know, if we wanted to be in the United States, I wouldn't even know where to be. I wouldn't even have known who to call. But China heard that we were trying to develop a factory, and they called us. Singapore also called. They started competing with offers. They put a very nice offer on the table. We ended up building in Guangdong. We put our research facility right across the border in Hong Kong. And everything was good. It was a beautiful deal. And then the financial crisis hit. And in 2008, it was this individual's swan song as the chairman and CEO, and he wanted to be careful. So he started thinking about scaling back the factory that they were building. The Chinese government, the Guangdong government said, whoa, 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 what are you doing? Why are you scaling back that factory? And he said, well, it's an economic crisis. Maybe we should think about this. And the Chinese government, the Guangdong government said, what do you need? Well, maybe some guaranteed procurement would be good. Okay, done. Done deal. Right? And if you think about what that means is the proactivity of government in building industries, this is something we don't do in the United States. And so this is not a question of us losing jobs to China because China's stealing them. It is a question of us losing jobs to China because we don't know how to build industries in the United States anymore. Another example, the one that's been in the news lately. In Massachusetts, Evergreen Technologies recently shut down their plant. They're moving to China. Again, many people in Massachusetts angry. China's stealing our jobs. What happened with this company? This company had $300 million of its bond shares issued by Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers went under. This company then went to the federal government and said, can we get TARP funding because we have lost a lot of money because of Lehman Brothers. The government said, you're not a financial firm, you can't get TARP money. Well, can we get some guaranteed of bank loans? Well, it's up to the banks. And eventually this company had a choice. Either we take the very good deal from China and stay in business, or we go out of business. Here again, this is us driving jobs out and China figuring out how to develop a very attractive global economy. Now, I want to put this in the context of what I normally talk about with respect to China, because I think that there is a broader context here that I often exhort people when I'm giving talks in the United States to learn about. So this is a story we know very well. We know very well about how a country that was very isolated in the 1960s and 70s and on the verge of bankruptcy at the end of the Cultural Revolution opened its doors and suddenly emerges from being on the verge of bankruptcy over the course of 30 years to being the #2 economy in the world. But of course, the real story isn't in the numbers. The real story is in how this world has changed. This is my favorite view of China because when I used to live in Shanghai in 1994, you could stand on the Bund, Huaitan, and look across at Pudong, and there was nothing there. Nothing. Now it is a futuristic, science fiction-esque landscape. Something that's truly amazing for the eye to behold. But in thinking about what China has emerged to be, I like to think about 3 major events that have shifted the U.S.-Beijing or U.S.-China relationship. Of course, 1972, Nixon sent Kissinger over in 71 to secretly meet with Mao, and he came over with great fanfare in 1972. Probably the most important thing that Kissinger ever did was open the doors to our relationship with China. That relationship was changed once again when Deng Xiaoping came, found his way to the height of the Communist Party, came to meet Jimmy Carter in the White House in 1979, and opened the doors to China forever. Of course, the most important day in modern times, or recent times, was in late September of 2001. But of course we had other things on our minds, so we didn't think that much about it. But China's accession to the WTO completely changed the game in terms of how this unfolded. But the most important thing to me is actually thinking about how China has changed our way of understanding economics. This is what I think is most radical, is that China is not just a story of cheap labor. China is actually a story of radical institutional innovation, and it is something that every economy around the world needs to learn fundamentally from. Now, I think it's very interesting today that while China rejected the prescriptions of rapid privatization in the 1980s, and the World Bank was at the forefront of that methodology, today who's the senior economist at the World Bank? Justin Lin, right? Somebody from China. Somebody who actually understands the economic reforms and economic transitions and economic development in the Chinese style. Right? And so that tells you something about how this game has completely changed. Now I want to talk very briefly about three things that I think are amazing innovations for economic thinking, because they completely turn on their head our understanding of how economic development should be occurring. I want to talk about gradualism, decentralization, and an openness to foreign investment. Gradualism, I think, is the magic of China's economic reforms. In the West, we typically think of economic development from a strategic position of, you come up with your model. It's usually a very mathematical model, and it's based on some very simplistic assumptions about how human beings work. And then you put that model in play, and then you assume that given all of the fact that all of the constraints that you assumed out of the system are right, that the model will work. Make no mistake about it. This type of thinking is partially responsible for the global economic crisis that we are in today. There is no doubt that simplistic thinking, very complex math, but simplistic thinking on the market efficiency principle, the notion that markets will always be the self-correcting bodies that are always going to be more efficient than any other system, is the right model. Now, there are very prominent economists today like Joseph Stiglitz who are questioning this notion and this way of thinking. But I just would like to point out a couple of things. I think gradualism is an amazing way of thinking about the world because of the ways in which it allows for experimentation with the economy. Most people, I'm sure, here know Deng Xiaoping's famous line about how the economic reforms would unfold. Feeling for stones to cross the river. Right? Moving slowly. You know what exists out there. You want China to be great. You want wealth to rise, poverty to decline. But how do you get there? You get there by slowly feeling for stones as you cross the river, experimenting with what works and thinking gradually about how to build economic systems. This is a brilliant type of economic model. It's very simple, but you'd be surprised at how many countries around the world don't adopt this type of model. Second thing that is really key here is the decentralization of the system. And I think most people in the West don't understand just how much competition and decentralization has been a key to the reforms. People often ask me, how is it possible that China could have had such success with the economic reforms without privatization? They must have privatized, right? It's secret privatization. But it's not. It's decentralization. We mistake in the West that governments are bad, private property is good, when the reality is what's bad is monopolies. We know all too well that Chrysler and GM were horrible companies as privately held companies because they were in a monopolistic position. Right? It has nothing to do with private property and everything to do with competition. And China created this model through decentralization. Now, that decentralization and local competition has led to, for me, to many interesting areas that I think are fascinating parts of what's going on in China today. Places like Suzhou, and Xi'an, and Chengdu, and Dalian. These places are the second engine of what's going on in the economic development of China today, and I think it's a magical moment. We also need to look at China's brilliance in cross-industry strategization. China's very good with the State-Owned Asset Supervision and Administration Commission, Guozhouwei, at thinking through what needs to be done strategically. If Guozhouwei says we should invest $34 billion in renewable energy, it's done. If they say we need to invest $15 billion in the building of hybrid cars, it's done. We don't spend time waiting for the question of whether or not subsidization should happen, because there is a governmental body that's thinking about industrial development. China is also great on that front of industrial development of thinking about cross-industry collaboration. In the oil industry, you'll often hear people talk about how it's so unfair to try to compete with Chinese companies because of quote-unquote China Inc. Right? Here, I've had one of my executives in one of my class from Shell who were saying it's totally unfair. At Shell, we just go out and put in a contract, and then we try to compete against PetroChina, and they got Air China and Tsinghua University and 3 other firms that are helping subsidize a whole package of goods. And again, I usually ask those people, what's so unfair about that? That just sounds smart. Right? So there's a really interesting model. And of course, the openness to foreign direct investment, I think, is a key engine of what's been happening here. Now, the interesting thing to me is that we have built industries like this before. It used to be the case in the United States that we built a key industry that dominated the world for a while on cross-industry subsidization, state-led coordination, and state-led investment in roads. We were the best in the world at building this industry. Now, of course, that fomented our reliance on oil, and then we became paralyzed by it. But that is an interesting thing to note, is that the way in which the automobile industry was built in the United States was fundamentally on subsidies. Right? So it's a very interesting thing for our own governments to think about and to put in perspective. Now, there's some good news here. There are companies in places like the south side of Chicago that are attracting organizations like Exelon to build their photovoltaic plants. But we need a lot of work in the creation of jobs. And that work in the creation of jobs, by the way, for me, as somebody who's now in Washington, D.C. and is very concerned with the joblessness right there, I'm very excited about attracting Chinese capital to Washington. I think state-owned organizations should be investing aggressively in Washington and building factories there, because I think that that type of collaboration is the future for us. Now, so let me just skip through my conclusions here, because I think the conclusions should be clear. The main issue for me is that as a scholar of China and somebody who is involved in political debates in the United States about where the U.S. economy is going, I think we have very, very significant things to learn from the Chinese economy. I think our dismissal of the Chinese economy as just being a place of cheap labor completely misses how much institutional innovation is happening here and how much China is leading the world in thinking deeply and pragmatically about how to build an economy. And I have no doubt that China is going to surpass the U.S. as the largest economy in the world. It's not just a question of, it's not a question of whether, it's a question of when. And it's a question of how that is going to play out in U.S.-China relations. Now, I'm going to stop there with my substantive comments, but I want to just run through a couple of things that are about our strategic initiatives at GW, and then stop and open it up to questions, because I want to talk about how our business school is going to relate back to those very crucial questions. Okay? If we think about business school education over the last 30 or 40 years, I think a very sad thing has happened. Since about 1970 or 1980, business school education bought hook, line, and sinker the idea that business should be built around the idea of shareholder value. We followed Milton Friedman down the rabbit hole into wonderland of neoclassical economic theory. We built business schools on this premise, and our teaching became more and more narrow. It became more and more focused on shareholder value and the functional aspects of business. And we forgot that businesses are embedded in society. They are embedded in political and social systems, and if you want to train talented business leaders, you better train people that understand how to relate to policy, and how to relate to politics, and how to relate to business leaders. That has to be a part of what we do. There is no better place to do that than in Washington, D.C. In the George Washington School of Business, which sits 6 blocks from the White House, across the street from the IMF and the World Bank and the IFC, we are at the center of that conversation, or we should be. And training business leaders with that set of thinking in mind, the set of thinking that's about the intersection of business and politics, and the intersection of business and politics embedded in the global economy, but also built around conversations of sustainability and social responsibility, and yes, ethics. There have been too many business schools over the last 20 to 30 years who said, ethics is not what we teach. That's for philosophy departments. We need to teach about shareholder value. And I'm sorry, but the crises of 2000, 2001, the accounting crisis of WorldCom and Enron, and the crisis of 2008, 2009 are the result of a lack of commitment to teaching ethical thinking among our young business leaders. The GW School of Business is committed to this. We have been. We've been one of the few schools that has stepped up and put ethics into the core curriculum, and it is a fundamental piece of what we're doing. And of course, for me, a fundamental piece of what we're doing sits here. Not at the Great Wall, but here. In this room. In this room, and engaged with you. The alumni that sit here in China. Now, I want to go very quickly through a couple of things. We care about rankings. I hate the ranking system, but I care about it for you and for our students. We have to. But we also have to think about what we can influence. We can influence what my peers think about me. If I'm doing interesting work and we're being noticed for it, other deans will step up and notice and they will rate us well. We can change what our employment rate is and think about our career centers, and we can change what recruiters think of us. We can, of course, change GMAT scores and these other things, but these are the things that I'm focused on in changing our school. Now, when I took over this job in August, we wrote a business plan that basically took a position on how we were going to get from where we are to being not only a top 20 school, but also the most important business school in Washington, D.C., the capital of the world's largest economy. That is the goal. The goal is to be a top 20 school within 7 years, and the most important and relevant business school that stands at the center of business and politics. Now, we think a lot about executive education, but we also think a lot about international development. And the cornerstones of where this is going to go, we haven't decided as a faculty yet, but my guess, if I had to lay odds, was we would have something in China, some focus in South America, maybe Brazil, something in the Middle East, and maybe something in West Africa. Now, one of the things that this kind of also pushes us in the direction of is a substantive discussion about international development. International development isn't just about business. It's also about the business of infrastructural development. If you think about what it takes to develop countries around the world in terms of infrastructure, if you think about what it means for China's investment in Africa, these are questions, if you think about what it means for the sustainability of water and food in China, these are questions that have fundamental consequences for the alleviation of global poverty. And they're very, very important questions to me intellectually, but also, I think, to the world. So let's just talk very briefly about what I plan to do in China, and then we'll go on from there. There's no mystery about how much wealth China is generating for the world. But it's also, I think, very important to note that China has a bottleneck in higher education. Before the economic reforms began, about 5% of Chinese students enrolled in higher education. Today, that has shifted some, But with the Gaokao system, it's still a very tight bottleneck. People know this all too well. You can't get the access that your children need to gain access to higher education because the system is too constrained. Think about how many people took the GMAT in 2009. China leads Asia by far. There is huge demand for business education here. My background, from an administrative perspective, is in developing executive education, particularly in Asia. So we plan to think about issues like executive education across the world. Now, there's some competition here, as you know. But we can launch our programs here, like the Specialized Masters of Science in Finance, like the Masters of Science in Accountancy, and we can start to develop very key offerings here that I think are crucial for what China needs. As a long-term goal, I would love to actually have a campus here in China. There are a few universities that have actually gotten independent campuses here. NYU just got its approval from the Ministry of Education to build a new campus in Pudong. Nottingham and Ningbo, Duke and Kunshan. There's not many. But there are a few places that have such deep commitment to this country and to this region that they have set up shop here and kind of put in their lot with the Chinese government. And I would like GW to be one of those. I also have to say, though, that as much as I love Beijing, Washington, and we will have a presence here in Beijing, I'm also a big advocate of what's going on in second-tier cities. I think second-tier cities are where a lot of the wealth is being created in China. If you look at where the Tier 2 cities are dominating, you look at places like Chengdu, Xi'an, Dalian. These are places that are having major impacts on the industrial innovation that's happening today. I don't know where this next spot will be for us, but we will probably be in Beijing and Shanghai and somewhere else in addition. I think we will have a timeline in which we start to roll out our presence and due diligence here. I hope to open an office in China in the fall of 2011, maybe a little bit later. Shortly thereafter, I hope to launch programs in the Specialized Masters of Science in Finance and Accountancy. And then I'd like to build executive education programs and expand that until we continue to build the core presence here that makes us not only the most important business school in Washington, D.C., but also the most important foreign business school in China. That's the goal for GW. Now, there's one thing that's crucial in doing this is that we need to leverage our strategic positioning that we have in the global system, in the global city of Washington, D.C. One of those is Washington, D.C. There's no other business school that sits where we sit geographically. But the other of those is the Elliott School of International Affairs. The Elliott School is a top institution. By some measures of statistics, but also qualitative measures, this is one of the best international affairs schools in the world. And they are consistently a top 5, no matter how you cut it. Now, if you think about the business schools that are truly aligned with their international affairs schools, I can't think of one. Right? Maybe Harvard and the Kennedy School, they have some, HBS and the Kennedy School, they have some ties together. But I can't think of another place where there's actually a deep relationship between the business school and the international affairs school. But then if you start to think about how we not just leverage that reputation, but how we leverage the expertise. So remember I talked a few minutes ago about international development. What's the best school in the world in international development? The Elliott School of International Affairs. Right? What's the best place in the world to be studying that? Washington, D.C. Right? And so if we start to think about some kind of joint institute that would leverage those kinds of ties, I think the world and the future for what we have as a proposition play at the GW School of Business is so exciting. I think that the future is amazing. And so we're going to be building this, and it's going to have benefits for both the Elliott School and the business school. But I think there's going to be some very exciting things that are going to be going on, both in terms of this alliance and in terms of what our presence in China is going to be as a result. So I look to all of you to help us build this. I look to you as supporters. Whenever I talk with my board of advisors, we talk about three things. We talk about work, wealth, and wisdom. Of course, on the wealth side, that's easy. Philanthropy is important for what we do. And as we build this institute, we're going to need help from people. But I'm committed to saying to all of you that every dollar that I raise for this endeavor, whether it's through tuition benefits or through philanthropic dollars, is going to stick here in China. It's going to be about building GW's presence here. It's not about profits at home. But on the wealth and wisdom side, we need leadership from our alumni, from our parents, from our students. We need people who are excited about and committed to what we're doing. We also need, from the work side, for those of you who hold jobs in Beijing or in Shanghai or wherever in China, to get our students jobs. It's crucial that I can send students back here and make sure that people are committed to hiring GW students at every opportunity. If you see that HBS student there and that GW student there and they're about equal, you're going to go for the GW student every time. Right?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. We need that kind of commitment. And so I just want to close by saying this is a very exciting moment for us. I'm so happy with the turnout here, and it's been great to meet you all. I hope we're going to have an event that's as exciting in Shanghai. And I'm going to be back here in April and then again in July to continue to build this presence here. So it's wonderful to have you all here. I'd just like to close right now. I apologize for going on a little bit too long, but I'll close my remarks and then open it up for questions. Thank you. Any questions? Comments? You'd like to go back to socializing? Yes, please.
Where do you see GW standing in terms of utilizing the resources of the business school?
In terms of utilizing the resources at the business school and the Elliott School and whatever other schools to help facilitate better business in America and better relationships with China. I mean, you talked a lot about the problems with companies going away to China because they have better opportunities, better chances to succeed. And where do you see GW playing a role in helping to get businesses in the U.S. to succeed a little bit more and catch up a bit?
It's a great question, and I'd like to just note two key things that I think are going to be the core of our strategy around that. So you're really talking about, I think, a thought leadership or a kind of what role are we playing with both businesses and governments to kind of help broker some of those conversations. So there are two key things that are going on right now that are going to be crucial with this. The first is that I have always believed that business schools need to do better at engaging with what local governments are doing, whether it's local or federal, but what governments are doing in terms of thinking about the intersection of business and job development, right? So we have lots of good macroeconomics that happens on the issues of the impact of macroeconomic changes on jobs, and we have some good microeconomics on career matching. You know, are mayors of cities that are in crisis reading this stuff? Probably not. So one thing that GW has done, for example, that allows us to step into this debate is we've become a part of the conversation with the new Washington, D.C. mayor, Mayor Vincent Gray, in thinking about his jobs initiative. He has said, as a part of his election platform, that jobs will be his #1 crucial issue. If he doesn't succeed in jobs, he will feel like he hasn't succeeded. So we have stepped up to say, we will help you. We will help you think through how important this key issue is. And so, how are we going to do that? Well, we have become one of the conveners of the intellectual conversation. And it's not just a high-level intellectual conversation. It's an intellectual conversation that brings together high-level academic stuff with the practitioners of the local community to think very deeply about how we harness a position in the global economy. Right? Now, how do we do that? Well, one way to do that might be that, for example, when Evergreen Technologies is leaving for China, can't we think of ways in which we can learn from the Chinese governments like Guangzhou that has attracted companies like DuPont and Evergreen? Can't we understand a little bit more deeply exactly how they are actually putting together tax break deals and procurement deals that help attract capital in that way? That's actually very interesting, because now it makes China not a competitive foe, but actually a partner we can learn from. Right? And maybe we should be incorporating our executive education skills and our research skills into understanding what it is that China's doing right and what it is that we're doing wrong. We hope to be the conduit of that conversation. There's a second, more specific thing that I can't tell you a good story yet on what we've done, but I have plans to do it. I fundamentally believe that the next wave of collaboration between our two nations is going to be about Chinese investment in the United States. This is a little bit mirrored by what we saw with Japanese investment in the US in the 80s. That was largely a failed initiative because there was so much backlash against it from the US perspective. But when you have countries that sit on current account imbalances that are so large, they're sitting on so much cash, it's nice for a rainy day, but that cash eventually needs to be reinvested. And where should it be reinvested? It should be where there's a group of wealthy consumers that have desperate need not only of consumption but also of jobs. Right? So you think about what Haier has done by building a $40 million research facility in North Carolina as a way of building their business in the US. And they have basically taken over the small refrigerator industry and done very well in a number of other appliances, right? They have done that by investment in the creation of jobs, right? So my fantasy would be, can I help broker those conversations on an intellectual level, but also, can I deliver some jobs for DC? Right? How many companies, how many Chinese companies need a presence in Washington and goodwill in Washington? I would say all of them. Right? Huawei is dealing with this right now. What if Huawei said, you know, we're going to put down $100 million and build a factory in Anacostia? That'd be good. Right? Like, that would get a lot of goodwill. And so, to me, that kind of conversation is a fascinating one to have. And figuring out how GWSB can be at the center of that conversation is a really exciting moment for me. Other questions? Don't make me cold color. Oh.
Welcome. And Dr. Guthrie, and I have a question and I know you are a strong advocate for China, and in your speech you have said a lot of things, a lot of good things about China, and the United States should learn a lot from China. But we all know that right now, the United States is still the strongest superpower in the world, and the United States is an economy with $14 trillion US, and China is still far lagging behind the United States with only, not only, but still have $5 trillion US. Let's do some reverse thinking. And what do you think is the most important thing that China could learn from the United States? And my second question is, what do you think is the most important thing that Chinese students can benefit most from studying in GW? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. So the first question is a good question. So I spend a lot of time talking about how great things are going in China and how poorly things are going in the United States. But it is true that we need to be very open to thinking about what are the strengths of both countries. And I would say my guess and my thinking is that there are two key areas that are most important of really learning from the United States. The first is very concrete, which is just, even with the financial crisis that happened in 2008, 2009, we still do have the best and most advanced thinking in financial services and kind of complex financial analysis in the world. I mean, right now there's different kinds of controls being put on, and everybody's a little nervous because the whole system got a little haywire and out of control. But our derivatives markets, our hedge fund markets, all of these areas that figure out how the secondary, or what some people call the shadow economy of financial markets actually works, it's a truly innovative part of the economic system, of the global economic system. So we can't completely throw that system out. I think China needs to learn it, and so that means some very concrete things. You know, when I look at the talent pool, so when I put up the slide on the Masters of Finance program that I'd like to develop here, Masters of Finance and Masters of Accountancy are the two programs that I think are the concrete things that I see deep need for in China. Right? Like if Beijing and Shanghai, whichever it is, or maybe both, really want to become centers of finance in Asia, there is so much work to do on developing the financial acumen that exists at such depth in places like New York or Chicago or London. I mean, China just has to develop this. And I mention accountancy also because it's not just about finance, but it's also about corporate governance. Right? Like China will not have mature financial markets until the corporate governance system gets right here. So I think that there's just got to be a lot of learning on the finance and accountancy side. There's a second issue that I think is probably important, which has to do with innovation. There is something about, even if the U.S. is kind of in a situation in which I would like to see more governmental leadership and more governmental regulation and more governmental input on how industry should develop, it still is the case that some of the most interesting innovations come out of the U.S. And I'm not an expert on education, so I don't know why that is, but it has something to do with how people are taught to think about creative solutions to problems. Right? So it's not only the obvious cases like why Apple is there or why Google is there. It's also that, you know, China's doing so well in building renewable technology, but most of the technology is coming from the U.S. Right? And so there's something going on with the educational systems that I think I would like to see China be thinking more about, and I know people here are thinking about it. But those are the two areas that I spend the most time thinking about with respect to China. Oh, and you asked another question, what MBA students can learn. Is that right? MBA students, I think there is a major trend in MBA education that I think is very important. So MBA education is, I think, a very good utility degree. So if you graduate college and go directly into an MBA degree, you'll learn the core concepts of marketing, finance, accounting, statistics, macroeconomics, microeconomics, leadership. But when you're too young, when you're 23, 24 years old, and you don't have enough career experience, you kind of just get the very basic concepts of those things. Where MBA education gets the most interesting, and this is where things are, I think, at the most innovative in the U.S. side of things, is where we're starting to see these specialized programs, most of them in executive education, where you have an executive MBA degree, but it's built around a specific industry or a specific niche in the global population, and it goes very, very deep in a certain area. We've built these kind of programs before at GW in, say, advertising. We built an executive MBA program for people in advertising because they had a specific issue that they were facing about their career advancement, and we could take it very deep and very specialized. We built an online healthcare MBA program for people who are managing healthcare organizations, and they have a very deep understanding of the healthcare industry. Those kind of programs will help you leapfrog many other people in your career, whereas the other type of MBA education is just another degree with utility functional areas. Still fine, but I think that the next phase is really the specialization. Other questions? Yes, please.
I went to GW 10 years ago, and 4 years ago I came back to China. And for the past 10 years, I've been seeing a lot of very interesting trends in China. For example, 10 years ago, many people, they really like to work for a international company. But now, the thing is quite different. Because more and more Chinese companies, they've been very successful, even more successful than multinational company in China. So I just wonder, you mentioned that in the future you really want to expand School of Business and art school to China. But since GW is not rooted in China and do not quite understand this market, how you can make sure this kind of expansion can be successful in the future?
That's a great question. And it's something every dean needs to think about, and I assure you that the people I report to are thinking about it and asking me those kinds of questions. But I want to be clear about one thing. To me, just being here and gaining a deeper knowledge of China and more proximity to Chinese people and a greater sense of what the important issues are that we're all struggling with is success in and of itself. To me, I would love to make money in this endeavor, but it's not purely a financial play. What it is actually expanding the minds of the students that I work with every day. Right? And to my mind, there is only one answer. We have to be here, and being here will be more successful than not being here. Now, you are asking a different question, though, which is, well, okay, given that you're here and you want to be as successful as possible, how can you ensure that success? And I think the way to do that is through partnerships. Right? I can't come here, I mean, I've been studying China for a lot of years, but I can't come here and do it by myself. I have to choose the right partners and the right institutions to be partnering with. I have to rely very deeply on my partners here who are alumni and parents and business leaders. I have to spend a lot of time. And so I think if we do those things and have the right partnerships, I think that our success will be, I will place high bets on. Yes?
Thank you. I'm very happy to hear your presentation. I think you said a lot of good words about Chinese model. I just sent out the message through my Weibo that's Chinese Twitter. Yeah, so you're very popular in China now.
Wonderful.
Yeah, but I'm very happy that to know that American began, and of course American government began to take a look at China from a different point of view. And because when I studied in GW, one of my professors, when they talk about China, he shows very arrogant, and he said, China is waiting for the investment. It's our choice where to give the investment. Yes, some kind like that. But I think today and now is a different kind of time. And the two countries began to learn each other, and American and also China has more opened their mind to know each other. Because my company do marketing research and public opinion, I know that Chinese people has kind of very struggling feeling to United States. United States is the first choice of Chinese people when they choose to study abroad, and it's the first choice when people when they choose to travel abroad. But at the same time, they have some bad feelings about Americans as well. So I'd like to know, beyond the government, beyond the scholars, what American people look at China, what their views to China. Thank you.
That's a great question. I should just warn you or emphasize the caveat that I gave you at the beginning of this talk when I said this was the view from Washington. I said it was the view of one person from Washington. So I'm not so sure that the American government actually thinks the way I think, and I'm pretty sure they don't. But I think this way, and I talk about it a lot. I agree with you that it is a different time. We are in a very different era right now. It was pointed out that America is, the largest superpower in the global economy, but I personally think our way of thinking about the use of military is completely behind the times. China actually is a country that deals with problems that arise on a geopolitical scale by creating economic interdependence. Right? To me, that's actually a much more sophisticated way of dealing with economic and political systems. So, in the case of Taiwan, there was a geopolitical problem there, But China opened its borders to a lot of Taiwanese businessmen, and before you know it, 500,000 Taiwanese businessmen are living on the eastern seaboard, and there's no way that that Taiwanese problem is going to raise its head again because it's just not financially viable. Similarly with the US, China has created such economic interdependence that we can't but be in a much more positive relationship. Now, the sad part of this is that you asked a very important question that I don't have a good answer for. Unfortunately, I think a lot of American people are very scared right now. And they're very much locked into a way of thinking that it's still part of the past. And they fear China. I mean, let's make no mistake about this. China was kept out of the WTO for 10 years, from 1989 to 1999. Many people claim it was because China was an authoritarian government and the tanks rolled in Tiananmen, and that's why. That's completely a lie. It's a lie, right? Because how many authoritarian governments were we dealing with that we didn't have the annual vote on most favored nation status with? Many. The answer is many, right? What we were worried about with China was textiles and tobacco in North Carolina, right? We did not care about democracy and human rights. That was the pretext. That was the statement, but that had nothing to do with what we were really talking about. Now, unfortunately, a lot of American people buy what I think is truly a propagandistic, right? We blame China a lot for propaganda. I think we have just as much propaganda in the American media, and that propaganda says the reason we're losing jobs is because China won't allow the UN to appreciate. Of course, the reason we want the UN to appreciate is so that hedge fund traders can bet on the currency, right? I mean, it has nothing to do with the reality either. And so, but we hear this all the time, and you know, the truth of the matter is, if the UN appreciated, that would not change our economic situation one bit. Because we still would be shopping at Walmart, and Walmart would still be producing goods somewhere else if it wasn't China. Right? So it has nothing to do with the problem. The problem is that's not what people hear in the media. What they hear in the media is that China is the real enemy of the economic system. The interesting thing to me on this front is why we don't worry about Germany. Right? We have a trade imbalance with Germany too. But for some reason, China is so much more convenient to point to. So, to be honest with you, and I feel sad about this, but I don't feel like American people's mindsets are where they should be. I think that there's a lot of sense of competition, a lot of sense of fear. And so I spend a lot of my time just talking to people about what's great about China and what we need to learn from China and how the American media doesn't represent China in the right way. So I hope that that message is getting out there. I think it's a better message out there than it was a couple of years ago. People are impressed. People are impressed with what's going on in China, but there's still a little bit. All right, we're over our time. Do I want to take one more question? Is there one last question? No. Yes, sir. One last question.
Back on trade, what do you think China can learn, say, from Japanese experience to make Chinese investment in the States better accepted there?
So I think that's a great question, and there's one very specific thing. Japan is horrible at outward investment. The way they did outward investment over and over again was very much of a Japanese-style closed approach. When they would go to places like the US, they would bring an entire team. They wouldn't localize talent. They would kind of have a system that was a very Japanese system and not an integrated Japanese-US system. And so I think China has a much better opportunity here because I think culturally, ironically, people always put Asia as one type of cultural landscape, but I think culturally Chinese people are much closer to Americans than they are to Japanese. And so I think the main thing is actually to be very open to building collaborative system. It's the same thing that we did coming here. There are many American companies that failed when they were investing in China because they just wanted to have the American model and they didn't think collaboratively about what it means to build joint ventures together. So Chinese people need to think exactly the same way when they're investing back in the United States. If they do this collaboratively, and everybody understands that there's lots of opportunity for economic gain within it, I think the future is bright. So thank you all once again for coming out, and I really enjoyed meeting you all. Thank you.
谢谢我们院长的精彩的演讲，更谢谢呢诸位家长、校友、同学、朋友们来参加这个聚会。为了今天这个聚会的成功举办呢，我们要感谢有几位volunteer 和几位，我想是说，首先呢感谢我们的一个今天的同到场叫 Amy Schwartz， 是我们乔治华大学校友会国际校友关系的副主任 Amy Schwartz， 非常感谢他为我们这次活动的举办付出了巨大的努力。第二位呢，我想感谢的是我们院长的助理 Sarah Doherty。Sarah Doherty, please stand up。请大家给我一个掌声表扬。Thank you very much for your efforts to make this event successful。另外几位呢，就是我们的志愿者冯世光先生，就是拿着很重的照相机那位的冯世光先生，还有莫小波女士，他们的儿子在乔治华大学工程学院学计算科学，是一个计算机天才，并且冯世光先生呢，出生于名门之家，著名油画家冯法四先生之后。孩子去乔治华大学，冯先生给我们学校捐了很多钱，非常感谢冯老师、霍老师。还有两位的志愿者呢，一个是叫陈冠南同学，是请站起来，谢谢你们，他们很早就到了我们的会场。还有丛吉洲女士 ，Thank you very much for volunteer work。乔治华大学北京校会呢，需要更多的志愿者。一起把乔治华盛顿大学北京校委会的活动办得更好、更成功。我非常荣幸的能作为乔治华盛顿大学的北京校委会的会长，但是我感觉呢，我也更希望做一个超级5星级服务员，希望呢能尽可能的为乔治华盛顿大学和乔治华盛顿大学北京校会做我力所能及的事情。再次感谢。我们的院长 Guthrie， 没有他的到来，我们不可能有来这么多的听众。Thank you, Dean Guthrie. Without your coming, we cannot get so many attendees. Thank you. 现在呢，我们要吃点小点心，谢谢大家。有什么问题呢？可以继续向 Guthrie 提问。我们也欢迎 Dean 经常来中国，下次来的时间更长，我们可以去深度体验我们北京人的热情。谢谢。